talk about memorization. Why? Because a little bit of a personal story, because I come from Russia, and in Russia we were expected to come to the first lesson. Hello. And have things memorized straight away. So, for example, my teacher, from the age of 15, 14, will not listen to anything unless I came prepared and played things from memory. And that went on until the end of the university. It was then a big surprise when I came to United Kingdom. First I was doing mostly performing, and then I started doing teaching. And I was very surprised to find out that in the UK you are not expected to memorize. You can pass exams without just reading scores, and there was no expectations of that at all, and people were learning it, and that went on to even music schools. And that to me was a really interesting discovery. So I was between, so I started thinking about it, you know, why we memorize and so on. So it's a personal journey a little bit, and also I think there is still this perception that, you know, don't push children, particularly children, and even at the conservatory. You know, some of my colleagues at both at Trinity and at Royal College, they are saying we don't expect students to come prepared or have things memorized, and they wait until the exam. So it still goes on until a week or two before exam. And even that, when I started teaching at higher level at universities, at Trinity, London, I really couldn't understand this. You know, why were students going on and not memorizing anything until literally 2 weeks before the concert? Whereas my teacher, when I was 15 or 16, used to say, you have to know the pieces really well to perform in standards 2 weeks before the concert. So it was it was a very big contrast between what I was trained to do and between what's happening. So it's interesting to look. I always think that, you know, when you thinking about this subject, any subject, it's always interesting to look at history. So I thought, you know, when did people start playing from memory? Does anybody know who was the first? Actually, Clara Schumann. Clara Schumann was 18 years old, and she played Appassionata from memory. And the critics of the time wrote a very bad review and said, how dare she plays things from memory? Who does she think she is? What a pretense! They were incredibly unhappy. And of course then, you are right, then Franz Liszt comes along, and he really surprised everybody with his ability to play anything from memory, because of course Liszt performed a lot of his own compositions, but not only. He was the one who introduced the audience to operas. He did transcriptions of operas. He did transcriptions of symphonies that people didn't listen to. And he did it all from memory, because he was really good at writing variations, improvising, and transcribing, so he could do it on the spot. What is also interesting is that era was an era where an artist, a performer, was this kind of mystical figure. So its list is Nicola Paganini, yeah, who was compared to devil, yeah, because he could also play from memory anything, and possessed the amazing virtuosic ability. So this kind of mysticism of audience for Liszt was quite an amazing thing. So of course he was the one that really established playing from memory. However, his contemporary Chopin was completely against the idea. And once he had a student who came to play in his lesson, and he criticized him, he said, "Who do you think you are?" Can you imagine in the modern world, who do you think you are to play? Because he thought this was arrogance. Now, I hear you ask why. Why was this happening? Because of course in those days a pianist was also a composer. So when a pianist played from memory, that meant he improvised. So he played his own music. But when the pianist decided to play music by someone else, he had to use scores. And it was also important because if somebody sat down and played a Chopin ballade from memory and not from the score, it would have been seen as, again, an act of arrogance, because it would be seen as he's trying to pass it on as his own work. So from a historical perspective, playing anything like by Bach or by Chopin from memory could be considered an act of arrogance, which I find quite an amusing thought nowadays. So, that's the historical part. Now, let's see what, I was thinking, what is happening in the world of today? In the artistic world of today. So if we divide artistic world of today into a sort of performing world, which is major performing institutions, and expectations of audience, and then academic, which is musical universities and competitions. So if we look at performing world, opinions differ. And now there is a door opening up that allows people to play from the score. So for example, in Carnegie Hall, I know the team quite well, some couple of people from there, they will never force a performer to play from memory. It's artistic choice. So they are very open to anything you want to bring to them. I'm going to start looking at other major institutions and see what's going on. And as you know probably that there is another major concert hall in London called Wigmore Hall, a very famous and historical venue. And I came across an interview with the director of Wigmore Hall, who said the following, if I can read without my glasses. He's completely against the idea of playing from the score. So, the music stand can be an obstacle between the audience and the performer and the music. I get really cross when I see a singer buried in the score, and I don't think performing for music should become a norm. People are paying a lot of money to hear an artist, and they have certain expectations. So this is a statement that is issued by a quite, an important man in performing world. Now, what are those expectations, you ask, if you think about the audience? Now, of course, the expectations of the audience grew enormously with development of technology. Because in the old days, even when you started recording and you produced LPs, remember those? LPs. You still can listen to recordings by Bachhaus, by Rubinstein, And you will hear a lot of mistakes. You know, memory slips, because it was done live and not in a studio, and nobody cared. It was just happened. Some of you, maybe the older generation, you might remember concerts that Richter did in Royal Festival Hall when he was approaching his 70s, and his hearing was disturbed, so he could not play from memory anymore. So he used to have a score in front of him and a little light to shine at that point. Yeah, there was another very famous and wonderful English pianist, Meyer Hess, that also used music. You know, but because they were such extraordinary musicians, nobody thought about this. You know, because they communicated so well that nobody cared whether they used music or they didn't use music. That was not important. But things change. And now, you know, with the digital development and with, I don't know if anybody of you ever had an experience working in a recording studio. Recording studios nowadays, there's hardly any time that is produced one take. For example, I don't know if you heard the name Friedrich Gulda. It's one of my favorite pianists. I absolutely adore his playing, particularly of Mozart. And it's very interesting. He recorded a Mozart piano concerto with 2 recording companies in the same year, the same concerto. One was done by Deutsche Grammophon, a very well-known recording studio. Another one, he paid his own money for the, you know, cheaper orchestra and a cheaper conductor, and he did his own versions. You listen to these 2 recordings, they're completely different. Why? Because big firms such as Sony, Gramophone, Deutsche Grammophon, EMI, they have a lot of control over what you want to do. So it's absolutely micromanaged by a millimeter. So that's what we're getting now. That's the recordings we're getting now. I'm not even saying how many takes, but the cutting and pasting of what goes on to prepare a disc is amazing. And then, of course, when you listen to the disc, you can hear that this is not live, real performance. This is a made-up piece. So it's this very interesting process. I was just recently involved in this, and I was absolutely shocked, you know, to do this. But so the Friedrich Gulda, the second recording that he did exactly as he wanted, and this is completely different playing, totally. Anyway, so yes, audience expectations. So audience expects this kind of flawless performance. So there were a number of occasions where people were performing on stage, performing from the score, got fantastic reviews, but then what happens? People take pictures. Pictures go on social media, and guess what? People react. Because there is this idea or a perception that if you're playing from a score, it means lack of preparation. Somehow people assume that if you play from a score, you're not prepared, or you don't have enough mastery to deliver. So the audience will see this, and whatever the critic says, it will appear in the social media stuff. So the attitudes are changing, but changing very gradually. What is also not helping, of course, is that the academic side of things. So if you look at music institutions, and if you look at competitions, it actually says, you know, you have to play from memory. What surprised me, again, when I entered kind of educational sphere, is that somehow the contemporary music is not expected to be played from memory. But you have to play from memory everything else. But I'm sure that those of you who have ever learned, studies by Ligeti, for example, it's in a way easier to memorize that than Bach Goldberg variations. So why is this? And actually, interestingly enough, particularly I think nowadays in the States, there are really respected musicians who choose to play contemporary music from memory and the older music using score. So things are changing, there's a freshness in the air. But if you go for competitions, as you probably know, because I'm sure a lot of you did this, it says a requirement. You have to play from memory. So you've got to do this. Now, we also need to think about the amount of time that we spend learning something from memory. It's huge. To memorize something takes a lot of time. Think about it. We could have been spending this time playing chamber music. We could be spending this time reading through opera scores. We could be spending this time listening to recordings. Doing all these things that can inform us how to play this music better. To be informed about the style, or to be informed about a particular language of the composer that we're working with. But instead, we sit and memorize. I'm sure that the students of mine who sit here, they're going, what is she talking about? She makes me learn from memory. I'll get back to this in a minute. So, and of course, apart from the time spent on this, there is also stress. Amazing stress that goes on with performing on stage without the score. And so many people, I'm sure that all of you had at some points moments where you just sit in front and you forget what the first notes are. Or you have moments of blankness when you see nothing, it's just a white sheet in front of you. Or somebody drops a pen and you get distracted and your focus is gone. Singers have it even harder, because singers not only have to remember the notes, they also have to remember the words. Lieder recital is a kind of dramatic resuscitation of something that has to be performed, talking to the audience. So can you imagine doing that with the score? It's quite difficult. But however, there are different talents. Some people can communicate naturally, and some people can have an amazing facility to recall, which can sort of course, help with memorizing. So you asked me, so what are the benefits? Are there any benefits to memorizing? And you know what? The thing is, there are. And there are many. So I wrote them down. I don't know amongst you, there are some people who are very good at sight reading. You literally put anything in front of them and they read it. And I've noticed over sort of my teaching career that those people who sight read very well usually miss a lot of details. They don't have enough patience and stamina to sit and work at something diligently and learn it properly, because they can just read fast. And they don't see the point in spending any more time kind of doing it and focusing. So this can definitely, when you ask them to memorize, it's suddenly they're forced to read the score more carefully. The other thing I found that is one of the benefits is kind of increased expressivity and artistry that comes with memorization. Because I've noticed something from my teaching practice. Having come to the UK, and I thought, okay, students are not asked to memorize. I will follow the trend and see what happens. And I found that they all come to a certain point where things just don't improve. So I thought, okay, let's ask them to memorize this. Maybe then we can do another level. And I was really surprised, and it wasn't just with one student, it was quite a few, that when they were coming back, suddenly trying to play from memory, and everything they did before, like with the dynamics and articulation, was gone. It was like a blank page. They were just playing notes. And I realized that actually when they were playing from the score, what they were doing is they were just reading the dynamics and responding on the spot, but not really studying it, not really practicing, not really getting it inside. So when they do that, then the kind of expressivity improves and the artistry improves with that. Then the other thing is it's faster speed and agility. And why? Because when our brain learns something, yeah, we learn step by step, and then we build bigger structures. So when you build bigger structures, or bigger sentences, or bigger, periods, you can look ahead, and you can see the arch, and you can see things further down. So therefore, you think faster, you can play faster, because then you anticipate. So memorizing really helps with speed and agility. The other thing is, of course, it helps with studying score more accurately. Because if you from the word goes asked to memorize, you've actually got to look not just at the notes, you've got to kind of zoom in and see details. Like, what is the articulation? What are the pen markings? What are the phrasing markings? What is the dynamic there? Because if you're trying to remember, first you have to study. So it gives you a focal point, I think, that kind of zooming in there. I think it also improves listening, because you free your ears. You don't need to read. With all the development of technology in the world, we are still people who can focus on one thing. Yeah? You probably read that multitasking is not good for you because it sort of makes your attention span very, very thin. So we can still focus on one thing. So it improves listening. And apart from that, it also, as we all we grow and we get older, it improves the size and the function of your memory. And all these benefits that I've mentioned, they lead to one important thing, which is more important even than memorization, is internalization. Because all those things lead to one thing: you internalize what you learn. And then it doesn't matter if you play from the score or not. Because if you've done the work of internalizing, if you've done this kind of memorizing, but you still don't want to deal with the stress of being on stage, you can't. Because you can just put the score, but you have studied it, you know it from memory. This is what actually was happening when these great artists played, like Richter or Myra Hess. Not that they didn't know the scores. They could play them from memory. That wasn't the question. But they internalized them, and that was there to keep them safe. So I think internalization for me is really, really important. Because it leads to what? Understanding the structure. Yes, because you have to build blocks. Yeah, you have to sort of build blocks like notes and harmonies, rhythms. A bigger structure of the piece. It helps you to understand it. You can then see the piece as an arch. Yeah, you can see from the beginning. You can imagine it. If you memorize it, if you've done the work at home, then you can actually see from beginning to the end. It visualizes. Yeah, and you can do things with it. You can move things around. You can play with some aspects of it because you have the whole picture. You haven't sort of memorized it, internalized it. It's very difficult to do. Because if you work with one particular section, the other section gets out of proportion. So you have to keep that. How do you do that? Unless you actually know the piece really well. And of course, it helps to communicate the character more effortlessly. Again, because you know the story. Yeah? You go on from the beginning to the end through the development. You know how it goes. You know which part plays what role, and how much you want to do, or how little. And also, it makes you more flexible. Because, you know, people say in the concert, I never perform twice the same. And why is that? Because you have an idea of the entire piece. So you can actually do a little less there, but if you didn't like it, you can change it. Because you know how it will affect what you do, your overall structure. And I think this helps also confidence. Because confidence is very important. Yeah? You have to walk on stage feeling confident that you've done this work. And because then, you know, of course, we all have adrenaline rush. We all get nervous. It's natural. But if you really know that you've done what you could, and it's memorized and internalized, whether you're playing it with score or you don't play it with score, you feel confident because there's nothing you can do for the future. You can only be responsible for what you have or what you have done. And believe me, it calms nerves. Because when you come on stage and you're not prepared, you haven't done the groundwork, you don't feel, you know, there's more nerves than otherwise. So that's my take on it.